Okay, there we go. That's what you may ask yourself. The question you may ask yourself is, what's the difference between Canada and the United States? Canada is an English country. English countries tend to denigrate the indigenous populations. Same thing happened in Australia, same thing happened in South Africa, in the African countries, same thing happened in Canada. As compared to the United States, what's the difference between the United States and Canada? The United States was not only settled by Brits, but it was also settled by Germans. It was settled by just about everybody in Europe. But Canada is primarily English. And the English have this idea that they have a social structure that they go by. So if you're a member of the aristocracy, of course, you're way up here. But in the United States, we don't have that. And because of that, we haven't lived the same type of life they have in Canada. So this is weird. I mean, this is really kind of strange. All this physical and sexual assault by spouses. This is by the person that loves you, the person that you marry. 1 out of every 3 married women has been sexually or physically assaulted by their husband. It's way, way lower than that in the United States. 1990s were a time of increased police presence in the United States and a decrease in crime. One of the ways they controlled crime around the United States, in whatever city you want to talk about, is by increasing the number of cops. By increasing the number of police on the streets, they were able to reduce the amount of crime in the United States, and it's been going down ever since. However, sensational crimes still grip the headlines. Foreign tourists were robbed and murdered from the airports in Florida. For some reason, they picked on Germans. We're not exactly sure why. Ranting teens assaulted women in New York City. If women were jogging in Central Park at night, these teenagers would grab them and rip their clothes off. And sometimes they would rape them. 29 students and teachers were killed from 1997 to 1999 in student shootings in Kentucky, Oregon, Mississippi, and Colorado. All kinds of crappy stuff is still going on. $2 billion a day is spent on arms and armies around the world. I was watching 60 Minutes last night. Fascinating show. They were talking about us taking on the Russians. The reason that we have to worry about this is because the Russians seem to be getting more aggressive. Despite the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, the Russians still seem to think that they are a world power and they would like to take over as much as they possibly can. And of course they messed with our last election, and it looks like they're going to mess with this election. They've already found hacking that has been done in Florida, I know, already, and the election isn't until next year. Potentially the hacking by the Russians created a situation where Donald Trump was able to win. And he was just barely able to win, as it turned out. He lost the popular vote by over 3 million votes, just under 3 million votes. But it was 44,000 votes that turned the tide. And of course, well, you can look into that if you like. In the last 100 years, 250 wars have been fought worldwide at the cost of 110 million lives. Of course, in World War I, 10 million men were killed in combat. Well, 10 million men were killed in the combat zone. 11 million people died around the world from the Spanish flu, what we refer to as the Spanish flu. They don't call it the Spanish flu in Spain, of course. They call it the world flu. Whereas wars prior to the 20th century tended to be between armies, at least when the Europeans were fighting other Europeans. In the 20th century, man learned to make war on entire populations, and now we don't just kill other soldiers, we kill everybody. The Japanese did this during World War II. At the beginning of World War II, they started a war with China. 1937, they attacked, not Shanghai, Nanking, which was the southern capital of China, and they claimed that they couldn't tell whether somebody was a soldier or not, and they wanted to kill all the Chinese soldiers, so they went in and started butchering everybody. They killed women, children, old men, and of course any man that was of the age that he could potentially have been a soldier. They killed over 40,000, 140,000 people. Butchered them. They won. These people had no arms. They weren't shooting back. They stabbed them. They hacked them to death with samurai swords and whatnot. So man's pretty ugly, and we've been doing this for ever. Aggression is physical or verbal behavior intended to hurt someone. Psychologists identify two types of aggression. There's hostile aggression and instrumental aggression. Hostile aggression is where you want to hurt somebody. Instrumental aggression is where you want something from somebody and you intimidate them. Instrumental aggression doesn't have to come to blows. If Emery said, "Give me your lunch money," give me your lunch money, I'd give him my lunch money. All he'd have to do would go, "Give me your lunch money," and I'd go, "Oh, okay, here's my lunch money." That's instrumental aggression. But if he punched me in the face and then said, "Give me your lunch money," and I gave him my lunch money and then he punched me in the face again, that would be hostile aggression. He just wanted to hurt me. My golly. Oh, sorry about that. Wait a minute. Next picture has dead people in it, so you may not want to look at it. It has to do with murder. Kind of hard to show murder without dead people. So if you don't want to look at it, don't look at it.
I saw Avengers this weekend.
Oh,
Plenty
okay.
of violence.
Okay. Yeah, but not real. Not real dead people. These are real dead people.
Okay.
Most murders represent hostile aggression by someone who knows the victim, all too often someone who is or was romantically involved with the victim. It seems like romance, loss of love really is very destructive. Instrumental aggression occurs in murders when the death of the victim furthers the murderers, as in the case of the cold, calculated killings of crime syndicates, and that's what those two pictures are. The question that many people have asked over the course of humanity is, are humans instinctually aggressive, or is it society that makes them aggressive? This is the question. Freud said that it was humans that are aggressive. Darwin agreed with him. Darwin said that we're just like animals, and animals are naturally aggressive. They will attack each other, and they do it naturally. However, that's not the only answer. The other guy that, we can talk about lots of different philosophers and lots of different psychologists. Rousseau said that it's society that makes man aggressive. I would never have killed anybody if I hadn't joined the military. Well, maybe, probably.
Less likely.
I'm guessing. Well, where would I have gotten a weapon? My dad wouldn't let us have guns. And the reason he wouldn't let us have guns is because he was afraid we'd shoot each other. There were 4 boys. We wouldn't let us have weapons.
I watched a show last week and it's kind of like an apocalypse show. It only had like 12 episodes. So first it set in, everybody was fine. Second day everybody was fine. Until the 5th day, everybody just kind of started killing each other.
Of course.
So isn't that the same thing?
Yeah.
Lord of the Flies.
It's called The Mist.
The Mist. Okay, I've seen trailers for that.
But they're like, you take away 9 meals and then that's all it takes for people to start killing each other.
So the humanists, the existentialists, they don't believe that humans are naturally aggressive, that we are made aggressive by society. Society tells us who to fight, tells us who to punch. That's according to the Rogerians and the humanists and the existentialists. So you can go any way you want. I mean, if you believe man is naturally aggressive, then you agree with Freud and Darwin. If you agree that if you think that humans aren't really aggressive and society makes us aggressive, then you agree with Rousseau, the humanists and the existentialists. The instinct theory follows the Freudian and Darwinian concept that man is just as aggressive as any animal due to our instincts. We have instincts that tell us to be aggressive. Darwin and later Freud and Lorenz saw aggression as more adaptive than destructive. Just as males and species will be territorial, humans are selectively territorial as well, protecting their food sources and reproductive potential. We can look at pre-Columbian Americas. We can look at the pre-Columbian Americas. There was still warfare going on, despite the fact the Europeans hadn't told anybody to kill anybody else. There was still death and destruction taking place in the Americas. You guys carved out this territory. How did you do that? Why do you call yourselves the warriors? Are you fighting anybody but Europeans, Spanish and later Americans? And the answer is yeah, you guys had to protect your territory from other indigenous peoples in the area. The Yavapai, the Havasupai, the Comanche, Apache, whatever.
So do you think like nonviolent groups are unnatural?
No, they're not unnatural. They just have been able to create a world where they don't have to be aggressive. The Pueblos, for example. One of the problems with the Pueblos, they weren't naturally aggressive people. And the Spanish had no problem taking them over. And the Spanish, of course, were doing all that crap that the Spanish always do to everybody. And then there was an uprising. Well, how in the world did these peaceful Pueblos, tribes, why in the world did they decide to fight against the Spanish? Well, it wasn't them, it was the Tiwa. The Tiwa were another Pueblo tribe, but they were an aggressive tribe. And they came into the Pueblos. This is in the 1570s. They came in and they talked everybody into fighting. So I would say, yeah, I wouldn't say they're unnatural. I'd say they've been able to find themselves a place where they don't have to be aggressive. There were northern tribes that grew corn. The people that were already relatively sedentary, like the Mandan and the Arikara up in North Dakota, they grew a lot of corn, and because of that, they were able to trade with all the more aggressive buffalo hunting tribes, and they traded, produce for meat. I'm sorry, go ahead. You're ready to say something.
Oh, you brought up something interesting. I was going to ask. I was thinking like the Quakers, how they kind of evolved, and then they insulate themselves. They position themselves inside the United States. But
Sure.
I wonder if they would still have that same guy if they were living like in Croatia or Iraq. And would they be able to?
Yeah, actually, there are some groups that live in Arab countries. A group called the Zoroastrians live in Iran and have been able to be fairly peaceful for an extended length of time, for thousands of years.
Well, you're right. There's a group in Iraq, and it wasn't. Some of the men turned to fighting, but the majority of them didn't. When ISIS took over that part of the country, before that, they were just kind of left alone.
Right. Yeah, everybody left them alone because they didn't do anything. I mean, they weren't challenging anybody, so people left them alone. Quakers are a good example. My family were Quakers when we first came over here. We settled in Salem, New Jersey. So if you look up Salem, New Jersey, the name Bradway's just all over the place. And we were abolitionists, like many Quakers were. But during the Civil War, of course, we decided to put our fighting where our mouths were, and we became more aggressive. Well, we fought in the war, and we gave up. We had to give up our religion in order to fight in the war. But it's just.
So do you think some societies just evolved and learned how to deal with existential threats by trade and other manners? They learn how to we would like to do that. I mean, that's what we were trying to do with the immigrants down in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. We were trying to give them money, keep them from coming up here. We were trying to change the way that they are, sort of, to make them more peaceful. But of course, it doesn't seem to be working. Well, Trump pulled the cash, so we'll see. No, we know what's going to happen. So yes, you can do that. I mean, the more, and you can say that you're more advanced because you're less aggressive. And the reality is, of course, aggression is instinctive. And since it's instinctive, it's more basic. But if you have a society, the Romans,
The Romans were very aggressive, but they were only aggressive on the outskirts of their empire. Inside their empire, they were very sedentary, relatively sedentary. So yeah, I would say that this population, the Navajo population, you guys live in an area that nobody really wanted. Well, it's not very nice, is it? You live in the desert. You live far away from everybody else. I'm not, and there's, I don't know how you guys survive. There's just no food around there. I don't know what you guys ate. You must have grown crops and fruit or something. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. It's the same way up north. I think it's so cold. It's cold as hell up north. I mean, who's going to attack the Eskimos, try to take over their iceberg, that kind of stuff. So if you can find a place to live where nobody will attack you, you don't have to be aggressive. If you find a place that nobody wants your territory, I guess. They were fighting over the buffalo herds. I don't know, this is a tough one. Because
I go back and forth on this too.
I know, because, as far as humans are concerned, how many of us have there been? If there were only 1 billion humans on Earth, there's a lot of land for people to live in that nobody is going to bother. We've got that, there's one last tribe in the Amazon, and they wander around in the Amazon, in the rainforest, and nobody messes with them. And the reason we don't mess with them is because they're the last ones. But other individuals, if they come around, they kill them. Normally, they're not aggressive at all, but they're very territorial. So I guess if you can isolate yourself, then you should be able to live a
Do
sedentary
you think
life.
microorganisms are like this too?
I'm sorry?
Do you think microorganisms are like this?
Probably. I've grown bacteria on plates. I used to work in microbiology, and usually, if you have a isolated colony, nothing's going on, it's just kind of expanding, and then it will actually expand faster than if it's around another type of bacteria that gets in its way. So yeah, okay.
Well, before when you guys were talking about territory and
Right.
I just saw something the other day and I thought it was so stupid. There's a tribe on a small island, so very little contact with the outside world and the government who...
This isn't Rapid Nui, is it?
I don't
It's
know what
Easter
it's
Island,
called.
the one with the big
Not
house?
Easter Island, it was a different island.
Okay.
But the government said didn't allow other people to go onto the island
Right.
because...
One in India, huh?
I'm not sure.
Where the missionaries went?
And they got killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was stupid. They went over there to try and start converting them to Christianity, and I'm like, why? And he got killed. And that video I was watching was making it seem like it was the tribe, like it was their fault in that they were the bad guys. It's
The church was pressuring the Indian government to go in and arrest some people and hold them accountable for murdering that missionary.
But
And then the church also was trying to encourage more people to try to go down and take his place too.
Oh, shit.
I was like, why are you guys still trying to convert people? Just leave them alone.
Sorry. I'm not a Christian. And I think it's all a pile of crap. You do understand Christianity. Christianity, in one of the rules is that you have to try to convert everybody. I know, if they're not Christian, you have to try to convert. It's called proselytizing. Proselytizing, I'm sorry.
Do you think that has anything to do with, like, the same what we're talking about, human nature?
Potentially it does. There's 3 evangelical religions around the world, and they seem to clash with one another.
I mean, I hate to use the word, I just can't find a better word for it. Can be taken a little derogatory, parasite.
Sure.
But that's what kind of seems like what they do.
You're not going to offend me. I'm not one of those guys.
I'm just saying, not to attack Christianity in itself, but there's other religions that are like that.
Muslim religions and evangelical religions.
Yeah, they'll go and then they'll just try to infect everywhere they go and kill off what's not.
Exactly. And depending on when it is and where they are, they are more or less aggressive. The Crusades, for example. my God, what in the hell did they think they were doing? If you talk about Christianity, you talk about the Crusades. The Crusades weren't only them trying to take over Jerusalem again, it was also they were crusading against their own people. They were fighting against the Europeans. They were attacking people next door because they didn't like the way that they practiced their religion. As stupid as that sounds. So one of the reasons why there wasn't a Protestant religion earlier is because the Catholic Church killed them. They butchered them. They burned them at the stake. They called them witches and fried them. They stoned them to death. They stripped them naked and stoned them to death. They embarrassed their whole families. And you can watch this if you look at European history. It's a history of god-awful violence where they butchered each other over an idea, over, oh, you stand up when you pray. My God, we're going to have to shoot you. And then we're going to take all your women and strip them naked and stone them to death. As stupid as this sounds, a lot of it had to do with sex, and we won't even get into that aspect of it.
Maybe that's why, if it's like what Freud and Darwin believe, maybe that's why a lot of people are so susceptible to like full on into religion, no looking back, and they just take it as the truth.
Well, you can understand why Freud did this. Freud was Jewish, and his people had been chased and murdered and raped and destroyed, and they stole their stuff. Ever since Christianity appeared, they started doing horrible things to the Jews. So I mean, it makes sense for Freud. I mean, maybe that's the only way he could rationalize everything. Rationalize the fact that his people were hated people, were despised people. Now, if you look, it was Easter, okay? And I had nothing else to do. So I looked to see what happened to all the apostles. Well, most of them were killed by Romans. But the church is based in Rome, and it was the Romans that killed Jesus. I mean, they're the ones that actually killed him. And then the apostles, when they were out trying to preach, it was usually the Romans that killed them, wherever they went. As strange as that sounds. So, I mean, how in the world did the Jewish people become the villains in this whole tale? Who did this to them? They wanted to steal their stuff, I guess. It's ugly. I can't talk too much. My wife might.
No, I find it interesting when you're talking about human nature, aggressiveness, and then I think religion is an extension of that.
I agree.
And I think there's definitely a correlation that could be made. There's a connection.
Well, you fought in a war that had to do very much to do with religion. And you probably had no idea which side you were fighting, whether you were fighting the Sunnis or the Shia. You didn't know who you were being attacked by this time. I mean, it could have been the Sunni. They look alike, they act alike. The only way you can tell if they're one or the other is to ask them. Then they'll tell you, well, we're Sunni militia. Oh, I'm sorry, we're Shia militia. You had no idea who you were fighting. You were just trying to hold down a piece of land. Strange. I mean, that's what Iraq was all about, And then ISIS, is ISIS Sunni or Shia? Is ISIS Sunni or Shia?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I could answer your first question to some degree, but the second question I have no idea.
Did you know who you were fighting?
Mostly.
You were probably fighting
the Shia.
Oh, you're fighting Shia?
Okay. Because the Sunni, it's funny, after World War II, or after World War I, and how the land was divided between Iraq and Iran, because the Shia mostly occupied the southern side, and
right.
or the Sunni, the southern side, the Shia, the northern side, but they were divided
right.
this way, and so that's what caused a lot of conflict. And
you were in Baghdad.
Saddam was Sunni,
right?
And so the Ba'ath Party was Sunni,
right?
So they got rid of those guys, and then when they started going after each other, the Shia from Iran were mostly funding the insurgents.
Right.
But
they were in the south. They weren't even connected to each other.
Yeah, it was really complicated.
It is extremely.
I can, like I said, I can only answer that to a certain degree.
However, detractors of the instinct theory argue that there are variations of aggression in different cultures. The detractors also point out that different instinct theorists have identified over 14,000 instincts. We have 14,000 instincts, and they identified most of these in the 30s. Since the 1930s, we have disproven almost all of these as real instincts. We have an instinct for religion. Do we really have an instinct for religion? The neural aspect of aggression can be studied in both humans and animals. Mapping the pathway of aggression, researchers have discovered that human aggressive response is very similar to that of the lowest vertebrates. Thus, aggression is as old as a reptilian brain. This is in the middle of your brain. That's where your aggression comes from. It comes from your amygdala. Research shows that people who perpetrate egregiously horrendous crimes found that the prefrontal lobe, which acts to reason control of aggression, is 14% smaller in murderers and 15% smaller in men with antisocial personality disorder.
Do you think this can be conditioned and passed down through DNA?
Yeah, you can be conditioned. We know it can be conditioned. You're in the Marines. You know that they condition you to be aggressive. I was talking to Dr. Losi, Dr. Losi, Ken Losi. He was in the Marines. My God, some of the stuff that he did. And they would fight each other.
I was reading this.
And they would capture each other, and they would tie each other up so that and put them under their bunks. That's the way his unit was. They pitted them against each other.
I was reading this article. Posted a video too. It was interesting about exposing a baby to a snake and a spider. The baby had no idea yet what this snake was,
Sure.
or viewed as a threat. But when they put it near, the baby started crying, got scared.
Sure.
And they're saying that
Right.
it was an example of
Of instinct. It was a
Of
natural
instinct,
instinct
yes,
about something that's dangerous.
and then they theorize that this has been passed down
Sure.
because snakes or spiders have been threats to us
Sure.
out in the wild.
Right.
And so it's kind of become instinctual. It's passed down through our DNA to the
Right.
next generation to just automatically
Right.
be afraid of those things. And they were saying that our taste buds and our sense of smell are actually part of that too. We know what foods are good for us and bad,
Right.
and stuff like that.
Anything bitter is bad. So how many people are afraid of snakes? Other than traditional. Are you afraid of snakes?
No,
Are you afraid of snakes?
I guess if I catch me off guard and I'm walking out in the
Yeah.
wild, yeah.
You are too?
like
Are
what
you,
he said.
are you afraid of snakes?
Kind of.
Afraid of snakes?
Yeah.
Afraid of snakes?
If I saw one in a store, it wouldn't bother me, but if I was walking in and saw one under my car,
I have a
Yeah.
brother that's definitely afraid of snakes. So afraid of snakes that if he sees a garter snake in the yard, he'll run in the house. That's how bad it is. Of course, we don't have poisonous snakes in Indiana, where we're from. There are no poisonous snakes.
I think traditionally because you're not supposed to be afraid of snakes. Technically.
Or are you supposed to be afraid of snakes?
I don't
no, we
think you're
have
supposed
one
to.
snake in particular that's a protector, the bull snake.
And you can tell the difference between a bull snake and any other snake.
I can tell the difference between a bull snake and a rattlesnake.
Okay.
Rattlers are really easy to. Diamondbacks.
The whole diamondback.
Then you got the thing that shakes on them,
The rattles, yeah, okay.
but a bull snake won't have that. It's a little bit bigger than the rattler as well.
Which is kind of funny because up north, they're not supposed to be afraid of snakes, but a lot of people are. And there's a lot of rattlesnakes up north. As a matter of fact, they have a mountain range called the Snake Butte. It's a butte, actually. And you're not supposed to kill snakes on the Snake Butte because it's a holy site. Anyway, I have a friend that used to go up on Snake Butte and kill snakes. There's lots of snakes up there. And he said one day he decided that he wasn't going to kill snakes anymore. He had a conversation with one of his almost victims, and he hasn't killed a snake since. However, of course, one bit my horse and just about killed it. One bit my dog, a rattlesnake. So I killed snakes. And when I told him, he got upset. because I'm a snake killer. I don't. Anyway, I'm not supposed to kill snakes. Let's talk about dogs instead. Genetic influences, heredity influences the neural system's sensitivity to aggressive cues, and that's what you were talking about. Can you condition something to be aggressive or unaggressive? And the answer is yeah. Just look what we've done with dogs. Research with other species shows that aggression can be bred out of a species through selective breeding over several generations. So you can breed aggression in or breed aggression out. Really? Can you do that? Sure you can. And the Russians did it with foxes. As odd as that sounds, foxes are wild animals, and they have never been tamed. But the Russians were able to do that, and they were able to breed out aggressive tendencies in foxes and make foxes pets. Isn't that cute? The interesting thing about the foxes that they bred to be unaggressive, they had floppy ears, they had bigger eyes, and most of them were not the color of natural foxes. So they were able to breed out the aggressive tendencies, but they were also able to make foxes more aggressive by selectively breeding those animals as well. Now we've been doing this with dogs for an extended length of time, and you guys know what are the aggressive breeds. Some dogs are not aggressive. The dogs around here don't tend to be aggressive. Even if they get into a pack, they don't fight each other. As odd as that seems. So if you wander around the reservation, of course, there are aggressive groups, but potentially those are dogs that were aggressive before, and then they pack together as an aggressive group. But there's a lot of packs right here in Saley where they are not aggressive dogs at all. They're relatively small. I have 3 dogs from here, and none of them are really aggressive at all, even though one of them is part pit bull. When pedigrees are uncertain or wild species such as wolves are introduced, the outcome can be tragic, as is evidenced by 4.5 million dog attacks per year. Some people raise their dogs to attack people. They breed their dogs to attack people. In 2010, there were 34 fatal dog attacks on humans. Most of the 4.5 million victims were children. Half had been bitten in the face, and that's usually why they killed a child. As you can see, this boy's been attacked. He's got a wound on his back, but look at the wound on the back of his head. It just almost tore his scalp off. From 1982 to 2006, the Presa Canario were involved in only 30 attacks, but 6 of them led to death. This is what a Presa Canario looks like. This is about a 5-year-old boy, and as you can see, they're very large dogs, and they're very aggressive. There were a pair of Presa Canarios that attacked a woman jogger, and it was her fault. How could it possibly be her fault? She was on her period, and it gave her a certain odor. And because she had that certain odor, the female dog attacked her, and then the male dog joined in, and they killed her. This is in San Francisco, as much fun as that is. Between 1982 and 2006, German Shepherd and German Shepherd mixes were involved in 94 attacks, and 13 resulted in death. Between 1982 and 2006, pit bulls were involved in 1,110 attacks, and 104 resulted in death. As you can see, almost 10% of them resulted in death. But then again, pit bulls are raised to attack. Between 1982 and 2006, Rottweilers were involved in 409 attacks, and 58 resulted in death. Why so many? Rottweilers are very large dogs. And of course, we can talk about the foxes. These are pictures of the foxes that they bred to be house pets. So they bred out the aggressiveness of the fox. This fox is not one of the ones that they bred the aggressiveness out. You can see they have larger and floppier ears. None of them are the colored foxes. And they were able to breed the aggressiveness out of them. And now they have foxes for house pets in Russia. As weird as that is. but they also have a breed of foxes that are extremely aggressive, and they're not sure what they're going to do with them. The Soviets were doing this. They were trying to prove that you could make people or something more aggressive, and they were trying to create an army of aggressive somethings, or at least prove that they could do it. It didn't take that many generations to breed out the aggressiveness in one group of foxes and breed in hyper-aggressiveness in the other group. Biochemical influences, blood chemistry will change neural sensitivity. Research and police records indicate that violent people are more likely to drink. Has something to do with alcohol. Alcohol makes people more aggressive. Violent people are more likely to become aggressive when they become intoxicated. So this is one of the reasons not to go into a bar. If somebody is an aggressive individual and they're drinking, they will become more aggressive. And of course, the reason I don't go into a bar is because which guy is he going to pick on? Is he going to pick on me or Emery? And I can answer you that very easily. He's not going to punch Emery. He's going to come over and punch me right in the mouth. Because you're larger than I am. You're scary. You're scarier than I am. And I'm not scary even a little bit, unfortunately. Intoxicated people are more likely to give a stronger shock when instructed to shock a person. They are more likely to get angrier when they think about relationship conflicts, and therefore, remember we were talking about Canadians. And the Canadians have all that spousal physical aggression and sexual aggression against their spouses. Why is that? Well, they drink more up there than we do down here. And when they drink a lot harder liquor than we do. Well, I'm not going to tell you the stories of the Canadian softball teams coming down and playing in our tournaments and getting into fights. They wanted to fight. It's like a bunch of goons. You know, we're playing softball. Come on, you guys. And these guys are coming in spikes high, and they're rolling the second baseman, and they're trying to knock down the catcher. You know,
I see that in soccer too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm missing an ACL in my left knee because of a Canadian first baseman, and missing a spleen because of a British goalie. Son of a bitch. And he was a friend of mine. My son was headbutted by a member of his own team who was English. He missed a pass, or he didn't pass him the ball when he thought he needed to be passed the ball. And this guy was on his team, and he came over and he tried to take him out by headbutting him. If you hit somebody with your forehead in the nose, they can't see. It blinds them. Okay. And that's what he did. He tried to hit him in the nose, but he missed. And he hit him on the left.
When it comes to soccer, you can do whatever it takes to win. St. Michael says that.
Is that good or bad?
No, it was bad because St. Michael we're going against them for a championship, and their ref cheated for them. So soccer, yeah.
Soccer's a blood sport.
Yeah,
Okay.
they'll do anything to win.
Of course, and everything is fair. Handballs, anything.
That's what they said it was okay to do for their team, but for our team, they said no.
Well, I congratulate you on making it to the championship game anyway. 4 in 10 violent crimes are committed by people who have been drinking, so alcohol has something to do with aggression. Just over half the rapists have been drinking before they commit their offense. 80% of women in a college survey who report unwanted intercourse have been drinking or taking drugs before the sexual attack. 65% of homicides and 55% of in-home fights and assaults, one or both of the individuals involved were drinking. So we got a problem here. Not only is the person who is doing the assaulting drunk, but the person who's being assaulted is drunk. For some reason, it makes men angry when women get drunk. And we saw this in a study they did looking at women were keeping diaries, and when they were drunk, men were more likely to be aggressive toward them. As odd as it may seem. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, do you think alcohol causes it, or do you think the tendency to be violent or sexually aggressive is already there, but people are able to control it when they're sober?
Exactly, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Alcohol takes away your inhibitions. So if you were aggressive before, or, well, you've got a level of aggressiveness. If you drink alcohol, those inhibitions are gone. That control, that degree of control you have over your aggressiveness goes away. And that's the biggest problem. So it takes away your inhibitions. So you're more likely to be aggressive. As stupid as that sounds. So we can talk about, that's what I'm talking, yeah, it's inhibitory. That's exactly what that's talking about. The problem is, of course, the first thing that it anesthetizes is the reasoning portion of your brain. It starts here and it goes all the way back. And we can watch it happen because as you're drinking, you know, you drink the first beer and all of a sudden you get a little bit lippy. And then as it walks its way, you take your second and third beer, all of a sudden you don't move so well, and all of a sudden you're slurring your words just a little bit. And then you drink a couple more beers and all of a sudden you can't walk very well. Well, we're watching it walk its way back. It has anesthetized the reasoning portion of your brain, then it anesthetizes the movement, you know, the fine movement in your brain. Eventually it makes its way all the way back to your cerebellum, which controls your gross movement. So we can watch it happen as people get drunk. And if you've ever been to a place where everybody's drinking, you could watch this happen. You can tell exactly how many beers somebody has had by whether you're slurring the words, you can't walk and kiss it.
I was just curious about like people who build a tolerance to alcohol.
Yeah.
People who've been drinking a long time versus someone who's just first time drinking.
They can handle it.
If you build a tolerance to alcohol, that even though you're not feeling the effects of it, or you don't think you're feeling the effects of it, is it still affecting you?
Yeah, well, you just have to drink a lot more alcohol. You can drink a whole case of beer instead of a six-pack.
Because I know a lot of people will say that, you know, like 2 beers will put you over for the average person.
Sure.
About 180 pounds will put you over the 0.08.
Right. But you're still functional. You can drive.
And then people will say that I didn't feel drunk or I wasn't buzzed.
I knew I was okay.
Yeah.
Sure. And they're right. But of course, this is an absolute. 0.8 is the level.
Okay, so we got it.
Yeah, as far as the law is concerned. I mean, you may be a professional drinker, and you're not drunk, very drunk at 0.275 or whatever, 2.75. I know, it's weird, isn't it? So this is why we're having trouble with marijuana. We can measure the marijuana in somebody. If you smoke a lot of pot, then you're gonna be inebriated all the time. You can't drive at all. But you know, we haven't figured out what that level is yet. The level of inebriation. If you smoke a lot of pot, it stays in your system. It's not like alcohol. Alcohol you flush out of your system in a matter of hours. But marijuana stays in your system for days. For a month, you've got this stuff in your system, and you can't. There's no way you can flush it out because marijuana is fat soluble, and alcohol is fat soluble as well, but it's not nearly as fat soluble as marijuana. Marijuana just stays in your fat, so you're going to be positive for days, for a week, for 2 weeks, and so it's going to look like you're inebriated and you haven't smoked in 2 weeks. As stupid as that sounds. So.
Is that because of the size of the alcohol?
It's a liquid for one thing. And since it's a liquid, we don't have to worry about it. It just flushes out of your system very rapidly. Yeah, you can flush it out of your system. You can't flush the marijuana out of your system. Testosterone is also part of the biochemical mix. Aggressive males given drugs to lower their testosterone lose their aggressive tendencies, so the lower your testosterone. I'm a really old man, and since I'm an old man, I'm probably a lot less aggressive than most people. You lose about 1% of your testosterone production every year after age 40. I'm 70. You can do the math. I'm almost a girl. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. Aggressive males tend to be edgier, more impulsive, with a lower testosterone, less tolerance for frustration. I'm sorry. We're talking about testosterone. When the testosterone level begins to decline, aggressive tendencies begin to decline as well. Men convicted of unprovoked violent crimes tend to have higher testosterone levels than men who commit nonviolent crimes. Males past puberty with high testosterone levels are more prone to delinquency, hard drug use, and aggressive responses to provocation. And this is why teenage boys are so stupid. They're just blasted with all this testosterone, especially right after they go through puberty. It increases like 10 times over a month's period of time. So all of a sudden you've got this sweet little boy, and then all of a sudden the kid's just screaming about things and punching holes through the wall. Why? Well, he's just had this surge of testosterone. His testicles have just started pumping this stuff out like oil or something. I mean, and it's just all over the place. And the kid can't control himself, unfortunately. So you got to watch little boys and little girls. You have to watch little girls too. Serotonin, in contrast to the aggression causing testosterone, serotonin is a neurotransmitter that controls the effects of testosterone in the hypothalamus. If it wasn't for serotonin in the hypothalamus, rape would be so common around the world. Males would just be insane because of all this testosterone splashing through their system. But of course, we are very similar to one another. One human in one part of the world is almost identical to another person. And we can look at their testosterone level, whether they're male or female, and they have almost exactly the same thing. Now, different cultures talk about this differently. In the Arab world, they think that females are sexually aggressive. And they have to be controlled. It's one of the reasons why they cover them up so much. It's one of the reasons why in parts of Africa they circumcise females. And in some cultures they will cut away the clitoris, which is the sexual organ of the female. They will do that, as stupid as that sounds. Why do they do that? Because they consider females sexually aggressive, far more sexually aggressive than males are. They think that males can control their sexual aggression, and they don't think women can. So there are some places that if you go to Nigeria, for example, if you go to Nigeria and the woman hasn't been circumcised, then nobody will marry her because they consider her tainted. And the reason she's tainted is because she still has a clitoris. They haven't cut that part away yet. As dumb as that sounds. It sounds dumb to us, but it's part of their culture. As odd as that may seem. You guys talk about your culture all the time and how important it is to you. That's important to their culture. So if you go to certain areas of sub-Saharan Africa and the woman hasn't been circumcised, then they won't. She's unmarriageable because she may as well be a prostitute. That's one of the reasons why when some African males come to the United States, they don't like females in the United States. They think they're too sexually aggressive, especially African American females. They think they dress provocatively, that they don't have control over themselves. As weird as all that sounds. However, if we look at everybody around the world and we take in the account of how much testosterone everybody has, there is no group that has more testosterone than another. We're all just about the same. Humans haven't been around for that long. I mean, if we look at chimpanzees, they've been around for millions more years than humans have. So humans you guys are like next door neighbors to Europeans, because we were all living in the same place for an extended length of time. So you're not that much different than I am. And if we look at your testosterone and my testosterone, except that I'm so old, we look at our testosterones when we were teenagers or your age, they were about the same. And also, you guys are able to control yourselves. You don't go around raping women because, that's what your testosterone does. It gives you your sex drive. It's in your hypothalamus because of serotonin. You have the select amount of serotonin. The individual that didn't have enough serotonin to control his testosterone, he was too sexually aggressive and somebody killed him. He was not allowed to stay in the group. He was discarded and he died. And he did not become part of the gene pool. And that's one of the reasons why our testosterones are almost the same. and our serotonin levels are almost the same. It's the same with women. Women who don't have a sex drive don't have babies because they don't want to have sex. Therefore, they fell out of the gene pool as well. So females have a natural sex drive, and it has to do with the testosterone in their hypothalamus. So serotonin controls the testosterone. Low serotonin levels have been found in violence-prone children and adults. People at lower socioeconomic levels tend to have low serotonin levels, which means they have less control over their aggressive behavior. Okay. The frustration aggression theory was first purported by Dollard and Miller just before World War II. Now you have to ask yourself, why in the world, just before World War II, did they come up with this frustration aggression model? Hitler was talking about he needed land. Germany wasn't big enough. There were too many Germanic people in the world, and they were very aggressive, and they needed room to grow, kind of like Daniel Boone and his elbow. But Hitler was saying exactly the same thing. So because of what Hitler was saying, Dollard and Miller tried to figure out what the hell was going on. And what they figured out was this frustration aggression theory. And it all had to do with Germans needing land. If we look at most of the immigrants coming into the United States, which group is the most numerous of all the Europeans that came into the United States? Which group is the most numerous of all of the European countries? France, England, Sweden, Germany, Italy, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. Which group has more immigrants in the United States? Because we're Navajos. All of them are assholes as far as we're concerned.
I would guess, without knowing, I would just guess English.
You would think so, wouldn't you? I mean, they were the first ones here. They controlled this whole country. Why in the world wouldn't it be England? And the answer is that's not right. The English have half as many immigrants as Germany does. The Germans weren't even a country until 1870. So there were a lot of people just leaving Germany and coming to not just the United States but also Canada, and also going down into South America. Lots of Germans, and they didn't have any place to go. One of the reasons that so many British came over here was because they had primogeniture. In other words, the only person that inherited land, if you had 12 kids, the only person that got the land was the oldest male. And the rest of the males had to figure out something else to do. So they became soldiers, they became priests, or they immigrated someplace. And that's what happened with the Brits. But the Germans, half the time they were being overrun by the Poles, they were being overrun by the Swedes. You know, they had no country of their own, so they just kind of came over here and they had farmland that they could have over here. They could have as much as they wanted. Anyway, so Germans, by almost a 2-to-1 margin over every other country. So most of the people in the United States who are white have German ancestry. I have German ancestry. About half of my ancestry is German. So, not that much, about 30%.
I don't know if you talked about it before, but have you ever taken one of those DNA tests?
I did, and I'm just white as white can be. I'm just the palest guy in the whole world, as sad as that is. I hate to admit how white I am. Yeah, most of it, like half of my DNA is English, about a third of it's German and French, some Irish, not a whole lot, but mostly Western Europe and English, as ugly as that is. Sorry. So if you want to blame somebody, you can blame me. Not only that, my family's been here for like ever. Well, they've been here for 400 years. So some of us were Quakers, and some of us were Baptists, and some of us were Methodists, and most of us lost our religion at some point. But so we're not very religious people. So you look at all this stuff. It gets kind of interesting. But we were abolitionists on both sides of my family. And we were part of the Underground Railroad, which is kind of curious. So we're not very law-abiding citizens. Okay, so we talked about the frustration aggression theory. The theory states that when someone is frustrated, they are blocked from achieving their goal-directed behavior, they respond with aggressive behavior. And this is the excuse they gave for Hitler attacking Czechoslovakia, the Anschluss taking over Austria, and then attacking Poland, because they needed land, they needed elbow room. Often the aggression is not directly aimed at the frustrating entity, but is displaced on someone else. It is redirected at someone else less dangerous. So the Germans didn't attack the French, even though the French were keeping them from moving down into that portion of Europe. They attacked the weakest countries they could find, Czechoslovakia and Poland. So they attacked anybody that was weak. And then they attacked France and defeated France, which they were really surprised that they were able to do that. People living in fragile economic or political environments, people of low socioeconomic status, tend to react to economic disappointments with aggressive behavior, often in the form of crime, and Emery has mentioned this. It has to do with poverty, the people stealing things on the reservation. It has to do with this concept of poverty. Usually these individuals suffer from deprivation, the realization that they don't have what someone else has. And we can see this anytime you get a new tribal president. Everybody looks at his ride and goes, oh, he must have ripped somebody off. And they get envious of the fact that now all of a sudden, instead of driving a Chevy, he's driving a Mercedes or whatever. Or he's driving a dually instead of an old mutter, with the great big tires. He's driving a dually. Relative deprivation is the realization that one does not have what a comparable entity has, and of course everybody's looking at him and getting pissed off. When aggressive acts are rewarded, the individual may learn to act aggressively in the future. This occurs in youth hockey, on our playgrounds, and with terrorists. When terrorists are negotiated with, terrorist acts begin to increase. When they are punished, they tend to decrease. And of course, this is how we have treated terrorists over an extended length of time, as curious as that is. When I was in the military, we were fighting against the communist terrorists. And I was in Germany when they blew up USAFE headquarters. But it wasn't Islamic terrorists, it was communists. It was Germans blowing up USAFE headquarters. The Weider Meinhof gang. And I told you the story about being the first medic on the scene after they blew up the headquarters. As much fun as that. And getting in trouble because they hadn't cleared the building yet. And here I was right there in the entrance trying to keep this guy from bleeding to death. And I did. He didn't die. Don't worry about it. He did lose his leg, but he didn't bleed to death. Albert Bandura first proposed his social learning theory back in the early 60s. His experiments with children modeling aggressive behavior has changed the way that we look at violent television programming and violent sporting events. Once upon a time, at 7 o'clock, prime time, you had cowboy television shows where the cowboys were always shooting each other. There was never any blood, but people died. It's kind of amazing if you've ever, that's not a very good way to talk about that, is it? If you've ever seen anybody being shot, they don't die right away. They hardly ever die right away. But in the movies, wow, you just pop those people off and they just flop down like you shot them in the back of the head.
I thought this was like a conspiracy theory because before in those old Looney Tune shows,
Yeah.
some of the shows like had the characters killing themselves. So like a lot of the shows would have like one of the characters hold a gun to their head and then
Pulling the trigger?
yeah, or some of them would be jumping off a cliff and saying I'm free. So there's like a lot of shows like that, and they're saying that that's the reason why suicide is so high now, is because we see how it's being done.
And they don't really die because then they come back.
They come back, but they're saying that they're teaching kids how to do it.
How to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Pull the trigger, they have a hole in their head, and Elmer Fudd's suddenly got a hole in his head. Of course, he comes back in the next scene, chasing Bugs Bunny. Or somebody shoots him in the chest, he's got this great big hole with no blood coming out.
Yeah.
How does that happen? Only in the cartoons, I guess. Children of physically punitive parents tend to use aggression when relating to others. Looking at the genealogy of physically punitive families, such behavior can often be traced back several generations, where the paper trail tends to end, but the abusive physical punishment didn't. 30% of abused children become abusive parents, which is good news, because that means 70% don't, but 30% do. This is 4 times the national rate. So if you were an abused child, then your possibility of being abusive is 30% as compared to 70%, but you have a 70% chance not to be abusive yourself. Absentee parents also lead to violent behavior, and this is one of the problems that we have looking at our genealogy. Sometimes we think that our family is perfect, we are taught that, and so whatever they did is right. So if they were abusive, then we think that that's okay. You never speak ill of the dead. Dead people are always good people. Isn't that the way it works? So if Grandpa was not a very nice person, we never say he wasn't a very nice person, do we? We accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. Now that doesn't fix what the crap that he did. If he was a jerk, we don't say he was a jerk. So all that jerky behavior becomes normalized behavior. Does this make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? If something bad happened, we need to keep saying that that was bad. Despite the fact that that person may be dead, and that's traditionally, that's the way your family does things, well, maybe it's time to change. If something is bad, we need to say it's bad. That's the only way to get rid of it. If we pretend that it's normal, we normalize that behavior, then it becomes normalized behavior. And it's going to be repeated in the next generation. If you spare the rod and spoil the child, and you don't know how hard to hit, and you think that that's the only way to raise a child, and by God, it's going to be repeating itself generation after generation after generation. If something was wrong, we need to say it. No matter whether it's your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandfather. How about that? Can we accept that behavior? Can we accept that? We have this problem. We have this problem in the United States. We repeat history that's not true. So we pretend that we didn't do anything wrong, that we've never done anything wrong. But if you've ever read Zen, you know that we did. Marius teaches. You were going to say something.
No, it's real interesting what you're saying. Sometimes I always wonder about like going back a couple hundred years to when slavery was socially acceptable.
Exactly.
Nobody thought anything wrong with people in the States. Didn't think anything was wrong with it. And people, manifest destiny was actually encouraged and socially, beyond socially acceptable. You know, people who were doing it didn't see that there was anything wrong with what they were doing. And it's taken like hundreds of years to get to the point where we look back on that as something that was tragic. And I always think about like, what are we doing today that's socially acceptable, but it's probably wrong too. Maybe that 20, 30 years down the road when we look back and say, we should have did something.
Well, see, that's what's happening to the politicians. Joe Biden ran the Anita Hill hearings, and he wasn't very nice to her, and he won't apologize. It's repeating on him. So if we go back 30 years, and 30 years ago, you could pinch a woman's butt and nobody cared. You could fondle her and nobody cared. Nobody said anything. Now all of a sudden, of course, that's with the Me Too movement, that's a bad thing. We shouldn't have done that. Those things are bad.
I see that a little bit with a current movement too. It's kind of relatively new, the missing, murdered Indigenous women.
Right.
It's something that hadn't been talked about before. It was just kind of, really a lot of people didn't even know it was a problem for a long time.
Right.
And I think people are approaching that, some people are approaching that problem the same way they've always approached other problems. It's easier just to blame somebody else, to say it's these man camps, to say it's white people, you know. But if you look at a lot of the women that end up missing, a lot of them are, a high percentage of them are involved with drugs and alcohol. And a lot of them are involved in prostitution.
Sure.
And a lot of that, if you look at the studies that have been done on this, not just with Native people, but all people, a lot of that comes from abuse at home.
Sure.
A lot of it comes from rape, and most people know they're rapists. This is like something that we hurt our own people,
Sure.
but nobody wants to talk about it. We just kind of sweep it under the rug. We'd
Exactly.
rather blame somebody else than our own sisters are having problems down the road. And I just always think we're still looking at this new problem. It's an old problem, we're just now realizing and talking about it. We're still looking at it as the lens from yesterday. We haven't said, hey, what are we doing that's wrong? What are we doing that's wrong? What can we do to change things?
And this is one of the problems I see with you guys complaining about the law and law. Geez, you know, that was a long time ago. There's a lot of other stuff that's happened. Bad stuff, but everything doesn't come from the law and law. If you continue to be victimized by the law and law, then how are we going to fix you? As a psychologist, if somebody's got a problem that happened to them 5 years ago, and you're still feeling victimized by something that happened to your people 150 years ago, what am I going to do? I have to deal with 150 years ago before I can start dealing with 5 years ago. If you're an alcoholic because of the law and law, let's get real.
Do you believe in historical trauma? Or
I do believe in historical trauma.
What would be an example of historical trauma?
Well, that would be, if you're, the boarding schools would be an example of historical trauma. One of the things that happened with the boarding schools is that individuals were treated negatively, and they were given a negative attitude about themselves and who they were. And of course, the boarding schools closed, what, in the 1970s? The last one closed in the 1970s. So, but if you have a parent that went to a boarding school, potentially they don't like themselves because of what they were taught at the boarding school. They were taught obsessive compulsive behavior. Potentially they were sexually molested. They were physically molested. All of these things repeat themselves. So that would be historical trauma, because it's still affecting you because your parents treated you that way because of what happened to them.
I think what you said is a hard pill to swallow for some
It is.
people.
I don't think it's complaining.
Probably
It's pretty much so a lot of the treaties that were made with the Navajo people during that time still aren't being honored.
Right.
So it's not a complaint, there's still things that are going on from that time.
I read a lot of discussions, and well, you know, people talking about this, and that's not what's happening. That's not what they're talking about. What they're talking about is the fact that they're still traumatized by those 4 years you spent in Bosque Redondo. And potentially your people didn't even go. They didn't capture everybody, certainly. And some of the people came in voluntarily. They captured a group. When they came through this area, they captured a bunch of people, but then thousands of people voluntarily went to Bosque Redondo.
But I think you can't tell a victim they're not a victim. They have to realize that for themselves.
Right.
And decide to get past.
Exactly.
But I think the hard part is verbalizing that in a manner that doesn't trivialize the trauma.
Right.
And I think that's the trick where a lot of people get turned off. But I think it's what you're saying is important because, like for me, when I was growing up, I grew up in a really traditional home, but I was told it doesn't matter what happened as well. Life's not fair. You still got to go out and do what's best. But not everybody
Right.
was raised by had that
And
positive
with that positive idea.
Yeah.
If you allow it to.
Some people being a victim becomes a part of their
Exactly.
identity.
Yeah, and you become victimized. I mean, African Americans, it's really easy for African Americans to feel victimized over the last, I don't know, ever since they've been in North America. It's really easy for them to feel victimized.
I think it's been like, when it becomes a part of your identity, it's really hard to overcome. I've seen that with veterans. When I go to like group therapy with
Right.
veterans, they have these pillars in their mind about what's true, what's not, what's right, what's wrong.
Right.
And it's part of their identity. They've been conditioned and it's been reinforced by going to the combat. And they live by the set of ethos and they come back and it's who they are. And when you try to talk to them about it, they feel like you're attacking their identity.
Right.
And they kind of become resistant to it.
Right.
And that's why it's really hard sometimes to get through and start dealing with PTSD issues.
It's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. It's one of the reasons I'm not a member of any of those organizations. Because I don't want to just identify as a veteran. You know, I'm a lot of other things other than just a veteran. That was 12 years out of my life. That was actually 30 years out. But you know, there's a lot more to me than just, you know, the blowing up of the USAFE headquarters.
Like, for me, I didn't believe in historical trauma for a long time.
Right.
But I started studying psychology. I started to realize it. And I think you have to find a way to validate that, like get the person to see it's just one portion, it's just one data point,
Right.
it's not your whole identity. There's other things that are in your life that as
Right.
well that you got to add it all up together.
It's historical, and there's no reason that you have to feel victimized by your history. You know, my history is, I have a history. Everybody's got a history. You know, everybody's got a history. Like I said, my wife's people shot my people because they were Southerners and we were Northerners. And my uncle, great uncle, was leading the charge, and he had the flag. And somebody shot him right through the chest. Could have been my wife's people that shot him. You know, and this is one of the problems in the South. I mean, they're still fighting the Civil War. No, they lost. It's time to get over it. That's history. You're not victimized anymore. Just, you need to move on.
I think we see this a lot. The one case that I saw, which was really weird, I think she was living in Phoenix, but she was originally from Chile. She strolled her baby out into the desert and left the baby there to die. So, like,
Wow.
had historical trauma, she said. And I'm like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? So, my friend was like, that's not historical trauma, that's just her being stupid. Like, unless she was, like what she said, unless she was directly affected by boarding school or she was actually there at the long walk,
Right.
it's not historical trauma. She just used that just to try and get out of like, killing her baby.
Most people are resilient to the extent that I love my children and I want my children to be successful. She obviously didn't care about her child and didn't want her child to be successful. Who taught her that her child was not a positive thing that needed to be taken care of?
This frustrates me.
It is
when
frustrating.
they say that, like, oh, it's historical trauma.
Well, it's especially frustrating for somebody who's a psychologist because I got to deal with this on a daily basis, on a continual basis.
I think it's not just historical trauma, it's just some people use it as a crutch. And some people use the way they were raised as a crutch.
Right.
Some people use their place in life as a crutch or as an excuse for their own bad behavior.
Right.
But I think everybody has to some degree of historical trauma, whether it's from the way your people were treated or
Right.
your family.
The way your family treated
But I think
their children.
you have to get to that point where you accept it. I guess you go through that grief process, you accept
Sure.
it, and then you decide, despite I'm going to move forward.
I'm resilient.
But I mean, that doesn't mean you forget, or it doesn't mean you
No, that's history.
accept that it was okay. I think you have. But that's the hard part. I think
Right.
for people like clinicians
Right.
to give that person some perspective. And I think
Right.
when people who are suffering from those kind of issues and they feel like their experience was trivialized,
Right.
then I think it makes them less resistant to.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point as well. Now, this is especially hard for me. You got to understand that most psychologists, even teaching psychologists, aren't teaching such an alien population. If you think about it, how many psychologists are teaching populations of people that are different than them? Hardly any. I mean, if we look at Bandura, was in New York City, he's Jewish, no, actually he's Canadian, but he came down and taught at Columbia. He's teaching all white people. They're all the same. White people don't have a very long memory. They don't remember last generation, let alone their parents.
I see exactly what you're talking about, because
This is tough.
when I go to like things to do with veterans,
Right.
when a clinician comes in to talk to the group and they're not a veteran, they didn't serve, they didn't go overseas in combat, it's very hard for them to relate. And then often some of the stuff they say will just get rejected right off the bat, and they lose all credibility.
Because they're full of shit.
Yeah, I think you have to put yourself in a mind frame where you're just going to listen to the information and take what you can out of it.
Right.
You can't accept the whole healing today, but
Right.
you can accept the part down the road.
Yeah.
And it's only after a long time you look back.
Now this is kind of weird because Sarah teaches this stuff different than I do. Because I don't know, Sarah's different than I do. But and Sue doesn't want to even talk about it. But I want you guys to understand what's going on, and I want you guys to fix it yourselves because you have to fix it yourselves. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. So I want you to help yourselves, and you can't help yourselves if you're constantly the victim. That's just the way it works.